Good morning, I'm Claire Murphy. Welcome to the Solo Bureau. According to the UN, there are approximately, right now as we speak, 258 million widows around the globe. Today, we're going to be marking International Widows Day by speaking to a really good friend of mine who in 2013 lost her husband way too young. We've never actually spoken about it before, so it's going to be an interesting one for both of us, but we'll find out how she managed to pick herself up and keep moving forward when she was a widow before she even turned 40. But before we do that, let's see what's been happening while you were sleeping. It's Wednesday, June 24. A ransom note reportedly from those who took US TV star Savannah Guthrie's mother, Nancy, from her home earlier this year says she's died. Some media outlets in the US have reported that they've been receiving ransom notes tied to the case since the 84-year-old went missing from her home in Tucson back in February. CNN has reported that one of the notes revealed that Nancy Guthrie was dead, but that those who kidnapped her didn't mean to kill her. They're saying she died shortly after her disappearance. Despite saying she would do so in her speech to the National Press Club recently, One Nation leader Pauline Hanson has said she will not seek to cut government-funded paid parental leave if her party comes to power. She said at the Press Club address that it was fair enough if women were not paid when they took time off to have children, saying why should business pay for them if they're not at work? But yesterday she told Channel 7 that her comments had been taken out of context.
There's no way, shape or form that I am actually saying to get rid of it. I've seen it's been very beneficial to women to get back in the workforce. There are businesses that cannot afford it, all right? It's okay for government, taxpayers pay for it. But there are businesses, smaller business, that cannot afford it. You put another pressure on the small businesses to pay for maternity leave, they'll actually fold.
As two nurses who made headlines for making anti-Semitic comments during a chat roulette experience with an Israeli influencer prepare to have their trial begin, they've had the video he took struck from being admitted as evidence. Ahmad Nadir and Sarah Lebda have pleaded not guilty to being menacing and offensive when they allegedly told Israeli national Max Pfeiffer via chat roulette that they would refuse to treat Israeli patients. The pair were on duty at Bankstown Hospital at the time. Lawyers for the nurses argued that they'd been recorded without consent, which is an illegal invasion of their privacy. The judge yesterday ruling that the video and any other recordings of the conversation could not be admitted as evidence. After One Nation leader Pauline Hanson called for Australia to become a monoculture, the Prime Minister has pushed back, pointing to the Socceroos as proof of multicultural success. The 26-man squad shares 15 cultural backgrounds. Two players, Nestri Irakunda and Mohamed Toure, are migrants. Anthony Albanese saying, "We have had rich culture, and when we look at the Socceroos, we see examples of that rich culture. People who are proud of their ethnicity, of who they are, but also who are proud Australians." He also pointed out that Australia has never been a monoculture, with pre-colonial Australia made up of hundreds of First Nations, all with their unique languages and culture. Legendary Aussie singer Daryl Braithwaite has announced he's retiring from live performance. Posting to his social media, the Horses singer stated it had become increasingly physically challenging for him to sing comfortably, and as a result, it had taken the joy out of performing, which has always been so important to him. He said he's loved being part of the music industry for the past 58 years, thanking his supporters. The comments are full of well-known Aussies wishing him the best, with love coming from Vicar and Linda Bull, Kate Sobrano, John Farnham's son Rob, Jane Kennedy, Tracy Grimshaw, Richard Wilkins, Angela Bishop, David Campbell and Deborah Hutton. And just wanted to touch on the fact that both the Queensland and New South Wales governments handed down their budgets yesterday. We're going to be outlining them in more detail in Friday's State and Territory Rundown. That's all for the headlines this morning. If you're off now, stay safe and stay warm. We'll catch you here again tomorrow. Thanks again for all of you who've been sending Carmen your winter glimmers lights. If you don't know what that is, you'll have to go back to week 1 of the Solo Bureau to listen to Carmen's initiative on how to better our mental health when the long cold nights really set in. Up next though, this week marked International Widows Day. We find out from a good friend of mine what it's like to lose a partner. We did talk for quite some time, longer than we can fit into an episode of the Solo Bureau. But what I'm going to do, because I think what Caroline says in this chat is so beautiful and very, very helpful, not even just for those experiencing widowhood, but just grief in general. I'm going to post the entire interview on Saturday for when you have a bit more time to absorb it all. So you'll hear just a little bit of it today, the full chat in a Saturday special. Okay, Caroline and becoming a widow, next. As I mentioned earlier, there are potentially more than 250 million women out there right now sitting with the grief of losing their significant other. The way we see widowhood here in Australia is one of terrible sadness. For many women, especially those who've lost their partners due to war, political unrest, displacement and health crises like the Ebola outbreak currently happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, becoming a widow can also come with economic instability. According to the UN worldwide, women are much less likely to have access to old age pensions than men, so the death of a spouse can lead to destitution for older women. Some widows may not have access to bank accounts to support themselves and their children at all, with lone mother families and single older women both particularly vulnerable to poverty. Becoming a widow can also bring with it cultural and social impacts. In places like Malawi, for example, one of the world's poorest countries, widowhood is seen as being akin to social death. Heart for Widows reported a story about a woman in Uganda who was widowed and had her 6 children taken from her, as well as the land they grew their food on, only to be handed to her late husband's oldest brother to become his third wife. That's despite laws that prohibit that kind of thing happening in Uganda. She did manage to fight her way to freedom with assistance from a US-based non-profit, the International Justice Mission. In some cases, in places like India, widows are even stripped of their humanity, referred to as it rather than she. But there is one thing that all these women have in common: loneliness. Isolation from your community can lead to severe mental health impacts. In Australia, widows aren't commonly expelled or economically ruined, although that can happen in some circumstances too. But more often than not, it's the loneliness that comes for them too. Caroline and I go way back. We used to work together in the 5AA newsroom in Adelaide, way too many years ago for me to start counting today. We've always had a deep professional respect for one another, and I've interviewed her in the past for other projects she's worked on. We've congratulated each other on milestones, new jobs, the arrival of a baby and a puppy, but I've never spoken to her about this. The Australian radio business is pretty damn small. If you don't know someone directly, you've probably worked with someone who does. For many of us, it becomes more than a job. It's an entire world, a place where you find friends and sometimes even a husband. That's what happened to Caroline and Richard. Meeting on the job in Albury, Wodonga, she found his dimples irresistible. Fast forward a few years and they got married. Didn't think too much of that 17-year age gap.
I just thought, we're going to be at different stages of our lives for, a fair amount of our lives. I was in my 30s when we met, and he was in his late 40s. And so we were just at different stages. But it was really interesting. At no point did I sort of think, oh, well, one day you won't be here and I will still be here. And if that's going to be, it's going to be, years and years in the future. And I do remember him one day, we were going for lunch, and out of the blue, we were just walking into the restaurant and he said, when I die, not if I die, but when I die, I want you to, meet someone else and be happy. And I was so taken aback because I guess I was in my 30s and you don't think about people dying, and certainly not your husband dying. But he was obviously cognizant of the fact that he was older than me and that at some point that was likely going to happen before I went.
Whether Richard in that moment had some kind of premonition, we'll never know, but it would become something she would reflect on not too much later. Caroline says they were actually thinking about starting a family in 2013 when Richard told her he just wasn't feeling himself.
I'm just feeling a bit off. I'm sure it's nothing. And I said, look, why don't you just go down to the local medical centre just to see? And he did. He went and saw just a random doctor who took one look at him, listened to his story, and he sort of said he'd been a bit stressed at work and there'd been some things going on outside of work, and he put it down to stress. And so he gave him some Valium, prescribed him some Valium, and said, look, just go home and take it easy. And I was so proud that he'd gone to see this doctor finally, but what he was experiencing was what was going to end up being a fatal heart attack.
Not long after that doctor's visit, Richard decided to live out one of his lifelong dreams, to drive a rally car. So he hopped in his own car, drove a few hours north of Adelaide with a mate, suited up and hit the track. Caroline says she drove up a little later and was met at the gate by police.
I pulled into the oval there where the race was being held, and there were some police just at the gate, which I thought was pretty natural because it was a race and they had all sorts of emergency services. And one of the police officers sort of waved at me and kind of waved me over. And in my head, I thought, gosh, that's such a Richard thing to do. He would have said, oh, look out for my wife and her little Ford Festiva. She'll be coming up, and just direct her to where I am. And so I pulled over and I wound down the window, and I said to the officer, I said, oh, yes, hi. And said, are you Caroline Winter? And I said, yes, I am. And said, oh, could you just step out of the car? I just want to have a chat to you. And I remember I tell this story all the time, but it's the bit that always catches me in the throat, because I remember turning to the passenger seat and putting my sunglasses on the seat. And at that moment, just knowing that something huge was about to change. And it's like a sixth sense almost. And I stepped out of the car, and the officer said to me, look, there's been an accident or an incident. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, yeah, look, your husband, something's happened. And I said, okay. They said, he's had a heart attack. And to your point, I thought, well, gosh, I would have thought it was going to be a crash, if anything, but that was a relief. And so I immediately said, oh, okay, so where is he?
She would be told that Richard didn't make it, that he was technically somewhere, but actually he was nowhere she could reach him. If you've ever experienced death close to you, you'll know that the time directly after it is incredibly busy. People reach out, you have decisions to make, a funeral to plan, there are condolences and offers of help, and then it's just you.
Someone told me at some point in that whole process that it's about the 6-week mark. And I was like, well, that's very prescriptive. And, a line in the sand that at 6 weeks, suddenly the noise around you disappears. But they were right. And I remember thinking at that sort of 6-week mark, when my family had gone back to Perth and the flowers had stopped coming and the lasagnas were all eaten, I realised that it was just me in this big house of ours, that once there was, 2 lots of rubbish that would go in the bin that you would take out once a week, that there would be, 2 cups of coffee in the morning, that there would be 2 of everything, and suddenly it was just 1. And it was a really jarring moment. By that stage, the shock, the immediate shock has worn off, and that realization that this is now the rest of your life.
If you are supporting someone currently going through the loss of a partner, Caroline says her mates had her back and responded when she didn't know how to answer that age-old question, let me know if you need anything.
I had a friend who came and stayed with me, just so that there was another person in the house for as long as I needed. There was another friend who, bless her, flew in from interstate just to make a fridge full of food so that I didn't have to think about feeding myself, or even worse, cooking for 1, not 2. There was my very closest group of friends when I finally decided to sell the house, who all came over and helped me pack, so I didn't have to do it alone.
She went back to work at that 6-week mark. It was what was best for her, and admits it's not for everyone. She found being back in her routine, the getting up and getting dressed, went some way to help her feeling normal again. But eventually she had to face going out and actually being social outside of work. And it was not an easy adjustment.
Occasionally I would go out with a friend, why don't you come for dinner, or why don't you come to a bar? And I remember doing that for the first couple of times, and how alien it felt to be around people laughing and kind of going on like the world hadn't stopped, and my world had completely stopped. But it was just slowly dipping my toe in the water, just to get back into some of the things that you would, I guess, call, everyday life.
Then comes the big question, maybe a little while down the road. Am I single now? Should I allow myself to think like a single person when I never went through a breakup or a divorce?
When one person just disappears and there's been no logical reason why that love should have stopped, it's a really strange thing to suddenly go, okay, well, I still love Richard. He's still there, but I'm also feeling like I want to get out there and meet other people, or at least just be exposed to other people. And there's that really fine line and tricky debate that you have in your head of, oh, if I show interest in someone else, even if that's what I absolutely want, am I betraying Richard? Is he watching me over my shoulder? Am I doing the right thing? So there's a lot of conflicting feelings when that happens.
She also says there was a moment when she realised that maybe she was going to be okay after all.
I do remember when I sort of first had a really big belly laugh for the first time, and I realised that when that happened, it was a very genuine laugh, and I thought, okay, you're going to be all right.
Caroline has since met and married a wonderful man called Drew, who's embraced Richard as still being a part of Caroline's world. And if you want to hear how he's integrated the man who loved his wife before he did into his own day-to-day, which is a moment that almost had me in tears during our chat, tune in on Saturday. It is absolutely beautiful and unexpected. But if you are hearing this and you're wearing a fresh new widow tag, which Caroline also told me becomes an actual real-life checkbox on forms you'll be filling out, which just seems kind of, mean, then she has this advice for you. Although remember, this worked for her, may not for you, but maybe it's just what you were looking for.
I was saying to you before we started chatting, Veuve Clicquot, was a widow of her husband, who was the champagne maker. So that always makes me feel better about the word. If you're worried about it, think champagne. But probably my biggest advice, and as you say, everyone's different, so take this with a grain of salt, but take it day by day. Take every moment that you can manage to do something. If it works for you, that's great. If it doesn't, that's okay. And you'll find that some days something might be easier than the next day, and that's all right too. I think the other thing is I said a lot of no instead of saying yes. I'm a very yes person, and I just needed to say no a lot more to protect my heart, to protect my emotions, my physical state, my mental state, and only say yes when you know that it's good for you.
As I said, I'm going to play that full conversation with Caroline. It goes for just over half an hour on Saturday when we've got a little bit more time to sit down and actually take it in, because what she says about her new partner is really eye-opening, and they have adjusted to her grief and her being a widow in ways that I would never have expected a man to fully embrace. And I'm sorry if I've underestimated you men, but I didn't expect this, and it is some kind of wonderful. So make sure you check that out as we drop a Saturday special this week. Thanks for spending time with me, friends. Hope you have a great day. We will catch you here again tomorrow.